And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Tuesday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. True Crime Talk Radio is a segment here on Black Box Online Radio where I talk about multiple subjects within a single episode. And because today is Thursday, we can say hello to the Fox. And it looks like we have a couple of people here in the chat. We have Batman66. Hello, Batman. Always good to see you. We have Jerome from Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. Hello, Jerome. Nice to see you too. And Casbah is here, says good morning, all. And we also have one from Charlie Don't Surf who says morning. And Scott is here too. How's it going, everybody? All right, so in the older days of Black Box Online Radio, I used to respond to a lot more questions and comments. I would do a show every Wednesday called the AMA, the Ask Me Anything, and it would be all about responding to what you guys wanted to hear about. And I really wanted to do that here on this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. But first, I want to preface this by saying we're going to see how this one is going to go because we have an approaching thunderstorm here, and these are some of the loudest thunderclaps that I've heard in a long time. I don't know if there's going to be a giant storm that's just going to knock this whole thing out, take out the electricity and everything. Let's see how things go. And also, by the way, right over here, I have a new fan that is kind of blowing in my ear, and let me know if anything bothers you with the noise, and I'll turn it off. And we have Until Tomorrow 9 who says, hey, Ned, finally caught you live in the AM. Love the show. Hey, thank you, Until Tomorrow 9. And I also appreciate lots of comments that you are sharing. Dean Hatcher is here. He says, morning, Ned. Dino from Nashville. Good morning. Nice to see you, too. And by the way, I would like to say thank you to everybody who listened to my interview with Aphrodite Jones, talking about all things true crime. It was on Zodiac Monday, so we started out by talking about the Zodiac Killer, and then we moved on to some different subjects, such as the Casey Anthony trial and the story of JonBenet Ramsey. Now, I fully admit that Aphrodite Jones knows more about true crime. We also talked a little bit off the air, and I can tell she's the real deal. She knows how to research true crime cases. That's why she writes books. That's why she has TV shows. She understands not only the process of getting in front of the camera, but what goes into the hard work that's necessary to write true crime books and make TV shows. But as far as her observations on the Casey Anthony trial go, there is something that I almost take exception with. Yes, that's right, me, Black Box Ned, taking exception with it, right? And her theory in the Casey Anthony trial is that it relates to the murder of Kaylee Marie Anthony, Casey's daughter, and that Casey Anthony didn't have anything to do with the murder, and that Kaylee may have died as a result of an accidental overdose of chloroform. In short, that Casey Anthony was knocking out her daughter with chloroform, and then she was leaving her for extended periods of time because she didn't want to find a babysitter. She didn't want to deal with her. And in all seriousness, she viewed Kaylee as a burden on her life because she wanted to have a relationship with someone who worked in the nightclub scene. The issue that I had was, well, it's actually something from one of you guys in the comments section. Back in 2019, I used to do this show as a daily segment every day for 20 minutes. And someone was like, hey, Ned, I noticed you're talking a lot about the Casey Anthony trial. I thought the best presentation that was done on this was from the show Marcia Clark Investigates. Marcia Clark was one of the prosecutors in the O.J. Simpson case, and I fully confess that I am not the biggest fan of hers. I mean, firstly, did she win? Was O.J. found guilty? That's the biggest reason, but just her as a public personality. However, she got a TV show, true crime investigation show, and I watched her episode on the Casey Anthony trial. And they went through the search histories. They went through the court documents. And one of the searches that Casey Anthony was doing was for something that was called foolproof suffocation. And that is something that sounds really quite similar to what would be lining up with the physical evidence. If there was some type of accident death involving Kaylee Marie Anthony, Casey Anthony's daughter, why on earth was her duct tape placed so close to her skull? What Marcia Clark was proposing was that Casey Anthony had Googled the term foolproof suffocation and was trying to learn how she could murder her daughter because she viewed her as a burden on her life. She knocked her out with chloroform and then wrapped the duct tape around her mouth, placed a heart-shaped sticker on the duct tape, and then buried her in a shallow grave once she had passed away. Then that went on to the famous 31 days of partying and getting the tattoo that said beautiful life in Italian. That's what I heard to have been the most plausible scenario. But I wasn't there. I'm not someone who can read into these things like a psychic can. And firstly, actually, we have some other people here in the chat. We have Jeff Thornton who says, "Good morning, Ned. Thanks for the votes." Yes, Jeff is competing in the Faces of Horror competition, right? Did I get that right, Jeff? That is something that's going to be going on for October. And you can hear more about that in Jeff's Facebook group, The Zodiac Killer and Me. Haynes Anthony says, "Why did the grand jury indict the Ramseys for child endangerment?" Oh, well, they were indicted for child endangerment? I don't recall that they were. Victoria says, "You realize that the OJ case is the only case Marsha Clark ever lost." Well, Victoria, that's like saying the only game he lost was the Super Bowl. The only event that she lost was for the Olympic gold medal. Okay, what are you trying to say? Something, Victoria? Is she the Michaela Maroney of the true crime world? The one vault jump that counted? Yeah, the storm has just landed here. Can you guys hear that? Let me know how this one is going. But, I did appreciate all the things that Marsha Clark put into the episode. Ugh, that is some nasty rain coming down. I did appreciate all the things that she put into the episode. Victoria says race decided the case, not evidence. Not exactly, Victoria. With the O.J. Simpson case, there was also the concept of reasonable doubt. And I know I'm basing some of this on American Crime Story, the O.J. Simpson case, and they're just saying in the reenactments, dramatizations of what the jury might be thinking. And they're like, yeah, I think O.J. did it, but I'm not 100% certain. I mean, I think that he did it, but what does the evidence say? And this is very similar, though. Like, O.J. had the dream team of defense lawyers, right? And this is what Aphrodite Jones and I were talking about with Jose Baez and her other attorney, Cheney Mason. And all of these people, all of them, especially Johnny Cochran, rest in peace, they played the game of, if you cannot convince, you confuse. That was a key element of OJ's defense team because you had Dennis Fung on the witness stand talking about DNA evidence, and OJ's attorney, Barry Scheck, is just trying to confuse the jury members. And in the Casey Anthony trial, they're talking like all about this stuff like smell evidence. And then the defense attorney, Jose Baez, is like, oh, smell evidence? Well, how much air is in a can? How can you smell that? And Until Tomorrow 9 says the OJ case had a major racial element. Marsha Clark couldn't beat that factor. Well, I'm really not 100% convinced that it was a race. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about this rainstorm that's going on right now. And Fire Pixie says, hello from the wastelands of South Carolina after the storm. Goodness, Fire Pixie, I'm complaining about the rain here. I hope that you guys are doing all right after the hurricane. But there's another story that I wanted to talk to you guys about on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, and it relates to the case of Daniel McNaughten from the 1800s. The three major stories that I follow on Black Box Online Radio are the Zodiac Killer mystery, the Jack the Ripper mystery, and D.B. Cooper. And I really wanted to wait and hold off until I could watch some documentaries about this, watch some episodes, read some articles, because I knew I was going to misstate something otherwise. It's almost like you have to learn something before you can talk about it on the internet. And even in a previous episode of Black Box Online Radio, I referred to the guy as Thomas McNaughton, but his name is Daniel McNaughton. And it relates to the insanity defense. And really just trying to show that some people are genuinely not guilty by mental disease and defect. For example, Daniel McNaughton murdered a man in the 1800s, in the 1840s actually. He was trying to assassinate the Prime Minister of England. And he thought that he had assassinated the Prime Minister of England, but in all reality, he had murdered somebody else, just a different politician. And then he was, found to be not guilty by mental disease or defect. And that's really where that starts out, the insanity defense. And when you actually, just sit back and look at these full presentations, there's an excellent documentary about this on the Serial Killer Documentaries channel. And when you actually look at the full presentations, so many people who are claiming the insanity defense aren't really insane. They have mental health issues, but they're not insane because They understand what they're doing. They understand that they are afraid of the consequences. They know that they are breaking the law. And this becomes very apparent when people try to destroy evidence, when people are trying to misrepresent their feelings, when people talk about making an alibi and they're not telling the truth to the police, they're trying to cover up for their wrongdoings. That just goes to show that there are lots of things that they are completely aware of. They have awareness of their mental faculties. And all these serial killers and mass shooters that are trying to claim the insanity defense, not guilty by mental disease or defect, not very practical. Okay, and Fire Pixie says, hello everyone, I'm using my phone because that's all I have, so forgive me if I don't see all the messages. Hey, Fire Pixie, I really hope everything did go well for you after the storm and such. But I said that in this episode, I wanted to talk to you guys about some things that you had left in the comment section here on YouTube to do this the way that I did the old AMAs. And the first one comes to us from Robert M. on the recent Zodiac Monday. He says, hey, Ned, I watched the Nancy Drew channel. She mentioned Rodney Hamlin and Gary Post. Firstly, I think the Nancy Drew channel's a guy, right? I don't really get anything feminine from the voice. I don't know why he calls his channel Nancy Drew. But he did a video on Rodney Hamlin and Gary Post. Both knew each other and worked together painting houses. RH, the poem on the desktop, could be Rodney Hamlin, and there was a taped confession of him saying that he was the Zodiac Killer with Gary Post. I know it is speculation, just telling you what I see and heard. That video came out about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, and I did a direct response to that episode, and you can find that on Black Box Online Radio under the episode Zodiac Killer Rodney Hamlin. And this is where I had a very big turning point with the Nancy Drew channel. At first, he seemed like somebody who was talking about the Zodiac Killer mystery in a very different way. And he said something in the first video that I ever watched that resonated with me, and that was that if we want to find a suspect that has flown under the radar, then you have to look at places under the radar. For example, he was thinking, why don't I try and look for some people who might fit the evidence that are not currently under investigation? And he found a suspect named John L. Johnson, who was a custodian at one of the high schools in Vallejo. And I was like, wow, it's an insightful video. And to this day, that is the only video that I've ever seen on the suspect, John L. Johnson. Then the Nancy Drew guy had a reversal, and he started talking about Gary Francis Post as a Zodiac Killer suspect, the suspect of the case breakers. Next, he incorporated Gary Francis Post's business partner, Rodney Hamlin, into his theory, as Robert stated in the comment. But what's this issue about a tape that shares some type of information about the Zodiac Killer? That was a pure theatrical recreation. It was a dramatization. It was made for the episode because there's some type of disclaimer in the description box or the comment section that says, yeah, that was made for theatrical effect. And on the one hand, that's when I had a real reversal about the Nancy Drew channel, because I was just thinking, hey, now, wait a second. Is this true crime or not? I get that maybe some type of Netflix special would do that. Or if you have 100% identified the Zodiac Killer, yeah, you might want to talk about some type of imaginary sequence that they would have had. Okay, maybe this is what he was thinking. We were just talking about the courtroom, right? Prosecutors and defense attorneys, they do this all the time. But to just call out some random house painter from California, take his name and put it into a confession, I was the Zodiac Killer. I killed a tramp named Darlene Ferrin. And that's what it says in the tape that he's playing. Again, it's not the real Rodney Hamlin, who was a house painter and business partner of Gary Post. And in that video, in that, fake recording, he calls Darlene Ferrin a tramp. And someone was like, that's absolutely disgusting. I mostly agree. But the only defense that I can give in terms of creative liberties and freedom of speech is he was trying to recreate what the Zodiac Killer might have actually been thinking. Not like he doesn't think that, I don't think that, you don't think that to call a murder victim a tramp. But he was trying to recreate what the killer would have been thinking. So on the one hand, I don't think that was a good idea. I don't think that was an honest thing to do. I think it's a misleading thing to do. But that's probably something similar to what the real Zodiac might have actually been thinking. And then the next one that we have here comes to us from an episode of Ripper Wednesday. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper, and the most recent one that I did was on the suspect Lewis Carroll, who is the author of Alice in Wonderland. And our first one comes to us from Steve, who says, I highly doubt that Lewis Carroll was Jack the Ripper. One can take any large amount of text and rearrange letters to get what they want. The heart and soul of this theory about Lewis Carroll, author of Alice in Wonderland, Alice Through the Looking Glass, being the famous Jack the Ripper from the 1800s, is that you can take pieces of his writing and rearrange the letters in different ways to make new sentences. And one of them that was created by an individual named Richard Wallace says that I'm down on whores and I want to cut out her uterus. So that's just like a very, very bizarre thing, but it's completely in line with what Jack the Ripper would be talking about and the activities of Jack the Ripper. But I agree with Steve. You can completely rearrange the letters in Lewis Carroll's writings to make new sentences. And one thing that I did not share in that episode, Jack the Ripper suspect Lewis Carroll, is it was on the what's that called? The Art of Murder podcast. I mean, this I'm gonna have to go back and find it because they have lots of Jack the Ripper episodes, but they were talking about some people that wanted to see if they could do this with Richard Wallace's book, Jack the Ripper, Lighthearted Friend, which talks about Lewis Carroll as a Jack the Ripper suspect. And they went through his book and they were able to say, okay, I'm going to rearrange the words from this page, and they could make it say, my name is Richard Wallace. I murdered Nicole Brown Simpson, the victim from the O.J. Simpson case, which we were just discussing. Haynes Anthony says, who is next, Oscar Wilde? No, Haynes Anthony, no. It's actually Edgar Degas, the painter. And firstly, Walter Sickert is a famous artist who has been accused of being Jack the Ripper. But there was a TikToker who made some videos on TikTok this spring. I think it was in May, and people were asking me to respond to them about, hey, what do you think about this person on TikTok saying that Edgar Degas was Jack the Ripper? And at the time, I was just like, I'm not even going to respond to that. I don't want to deal with any of these kind of like TikTokers saying silly things. Flash forward to now. J-Foy really took the world by storm and broke that rule for me because he just made such an impact with his videos on TikTok trying to solve the Zodiac Killer mystery and looking at his Zodiac Killer suspect, Richard Hoffman, his biological grandfather. I've already crossed that line. I guess I would have no reason to go back or anything like that. And I guess people have the right to share their findings on TikTok. People share stuff on YouTube all the time. People have Facebook groups. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is that some people will write out these brilliant historical articles about true crime cases that, they're talking about some of the stories that are connected to the Zodiac Killer mystery that I don't find anywhere else. It's almost like they're recreations of news articles, but I can't find like the original sources. So it only leads me to believe that these are like historians or just sleuths doing their own investigations, and they're sharing them on Facebook. And I've read a lot of those off on Black Box Online Radio for the different stories in the past. So if I'm going to be using Facebook and YouTube as a way to listen to people's opinions, I guess we have to listen to TikTok too. The only difference is TikTok has an extreme time limit, and that's going to make it a little bit difficult to get a lot of facts out there. But as of now, I've not watched any of these videos on Edgar Degas being Jack the Ripper. Maybe I dismissed them too early. Maybe I didn't. And it's always curious to know how these creative types are thinking. Lewis Carroll seems like a fascinating individual. And Haynes Anthony says, it is thought that Degas died a virgin. See, I really don't know too much about him. Maybe I can do a future episode of Ripper Wednesday, but I do appreciate that, Haynes Anthony. And we have another one here. Hey, until tomorrow 9, this is actually you in the comments section. When you are talking about the Zodiac Killer and his frequent quotations of the Mikado. And this is from Until Tomorrow 9, who says, High school dropouts don't know anything about the Mikado, let alone make quips using the dialogue. And to be fair to Until Tomorrow Night, it just says dropouts. I'm sure you meant high school dropouts. When I first read that comment, I was like, I've known a lot of high school dropouts that have been very articulate. When I was a teenager, I worked in a restaurant. It was Pizza Hut, actually. I don't know why I was so hesitant to hide the name. It doesn't even exist anymore in West Virginia. That it got turned into a Walgreens. Cursed, cruel world. And I had this coworker that would just kind of like make up these silly things that would be on par with the highest quality stand-up comedian that you could think of. He would just kind of do his spiel. Some of it was almost like comedic rapping and so on, but he was really good at it. Yeah, pure high school dropout. He even had like a speech impediment and he would work that into his act. He didn't do any real stand-up comedy. I'm like, dude, you got to be a comedian. And he's just saying, no, that's not really for me. He's just making people laugh and so on. And that's what he wanted to do. I've also known other dropouts who can express opinions very well. They're very assertive with their opinions. But that's not exactly what Until Tomorrow said. What she said is that this is about citing the Mikado from Gilbert and Sullivan, because the Zodiac Killer mentions the Mikado by Gilbert and Sullivan in multiple correspondences. He frequently quotes the Mikado, or badly quotes the Mikado, maybe doing it from memory. That's why the words are off a little bit. No, I don't think any of the dropouts that I knew would have quoted the Mikado or even been familiar with anything by Gilbert and Sullivan. There's actually a second comment that is written by Until Tomorrow 9 on a Ripper Wednesday episode talking about Lewis Carroll as a Jack the Ripper suspect. And Until Tomorrow 9 says, I agree that the accusation that Lewis Carroll was not only Jack the Ripper but a pedophile does not diminish his legacy as a writer. Good writing is good writing over and above any personal faults. Now, I want to be clear about something. I did this episode on Lewis Carroll as a Jack the Ripper suspect. And I was presented with this challenge question from somebody else's show. And I think it was on The Art of Crime. And they were saying that Lewis Carroll is more famous for being the author of Alice in Wonderland, Alice Through the Looking Glass. He wrote the poem Jabberwocky. Does being accused of being Jack the Ripper tarnish his legacy? And I said no. But Lewis Carroll has other allegations against him. And some scholars, some historians think that he was a pedophile. Now, do I think that that tarnishes his legacy? Yes. Anytime one of these literary figures gets accused of being a pedophile, anytime one of these historical figures gets accused of being a pedophile, yes, I think that tarnishes their legacy. And I mean, like Haynes Anthony was just talking about Degas. If Edgar Degas was going to be accused of being a pedophile, I think that would have detrimental effects to his historical reputation. The reason why I said I didn't think that Lewis Carroll's accusation of being Jack the Ripper affects his reputation as a writer is because it's not widely accepted. As far as I know, the only person in the world who seriously entertained it was Richard Wallace. And he put out a book in 1996. I don't really think he convinced everybody. All right, and we just have some other things here in the chat. Firstly, we have Tony says, great episode, Ned. Love the work you put in your channel. Thank you. And also we have one from It's Bright One who says, one of the best podcasts on YouTube. And thank you so much to everybody who listens to Black Box Online Radio and tunes into these live streams every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. True Crime Talk Radio in the morning with me, Black Box Ned. And you can also listen on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for episodes about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and D.B. Cooper, respectively. And on the weekends, I will be releasing segments of my audiobook for the White Horse Killer Saga. I'm on the fourth story now, called The Eyes of the White Horse. The new episode will be coming out on Saturday here on this channel, Black Box Online Radio. You can always hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And this show is available for free downloads on Spotify under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast. Until Tomorrow 9 says, tarnishing a personal legacy is different from saying your work is now invalid. Well, yeah, I agree. I agree. I mean, I think though that there are lots of historical figures where people are like, they are brilliant writers or something like that, but maybe they did some bad things. Okay, here's a big one. Have you heard of Michael Jackson? He's a rather interesting figure in the world of pop culture history because do you guys remember this? Michael Jackson had this explosion into a career from his youth. You know, he is a singer with the Jackson 5, and he did the song Rockin' Robin, which everybody loved. And then he did, what was it? What was that first album? Against the Wall, right? Or Off the Wall? Off the Wall, right? That has Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. That's the big song, right? Then Thriller comes out and goes on to be the biggest album of all time, and definitely the biggest album of all time from a solo artist. Michael Jackson was somebody that was loved by the musical world. He was called the King of Pop. Then the 90s happened. The allegations. Michael Jackson also just became somebody who had a terrible reputation and building the amusement park in his house, the allegations of even having plastic surgery, bizarre behavior, having his own private zoo or something like that, and everybody hated him. And do you guys not remember this? For years, people did not like Michael Jackson in the public eye. And yes, a lot of it had to do with the accusations of abusing children. Then, as soon as he passed away, boom, the explosion comes back and everybody loves his music again. But no matter what, no matter what people said about anything to do with his personal life, I think that even the people that trash talked him during the years 2000 to 2010 still thought that he was a pretty good singer, musician, songwriter, dancer, performer. They still acknowledged that, and they thought he was a very gifted individual. But Until Tomorrow 9 has a different one here saying, we know what bad things Roman Polanski did, but it doesn't change his ability to direct excellent films. Oh, yes, Roman Polanski's a rapist. He openly admitted it. And I have an episode on this channel called Several Crimes of Roman Polanski. It's one of the older black box recordings. Roman Polanski committed the rape of an individual named Samantha Geimer. And she went on to write a book called The Girl. That's just what it's called, The Girl by Samantha Geimer. And Roman Polanski was an excellent filmmaker. If he's still going to make anything new, I could say he is an excellent filmmaker. He did something terrible, and he got into a lot of legal consequences for that. But the issue is, though, I think that people might be able to differentiate someone's being a talented performer, a talented filmmaker, talented author, versus being a terrible, terrible individual in their personal life, being a sex offender. I agree with you there Until Tomorrow 9. But when you look at the legacy that they leave behind, they can be viewed in a positive light by historians, by us in the 21st century, or they can be viewed in a negative light. And I do think that these accusations against Lewis Carroll would be put in him in a negative light. And here's a big difference. Everybody in the chat. Roman Polanski actually did it. He admits that he did it. Samantha Geimer wrote a whole book about how he did it. And Polanski isn't even like denying it. Lewis Carroll doesn't even have a say. He doesn't have a day in court. He's been dead for more than 100 years. Lewis Carroll passed away in January of 1898. I just did the episode. And he doesn't really get to defend himself. And furthermore, we don't actually know. One theory about Lewis Carroll is that some people just kind of assumed that he was doing things bad with children because he's writing these children's stories. And I mean, in a lot of ways, Alice in Wonderland is geared toward children. But as I talked about in my episode, there are a lot of things that he's done where it appears that he's actually trying to share it to both children and adults. And also, he's just sharing his own creative process. Now, this is another thing that historians were talking about. Did Lewis Carroll have autism? It's quite possible. It's quite possible. And Charlie says, Roman Polanski kills me. He has no shame. No, he doesn't. And I went into all of that in my episode, like finding the interview clips, because there was this reporter that did an interview lunch with him. And that's a really lousy thing to do when you're recording an interview, because it's made in like the 1980s or something. And they're just like eating and drinking the whole time. Right. So you look. And like you actually hear all the noises of them eating and the fork and knife cutting things on the plate. But after 2 glasses of wine, people start talking more openly and freely. After coffee, people start talking more openly and freely. And you can just see Roman Polanski be like, yeah, whatever, whatever. Yeah, she was 13, I know, but whatever, whatever. He just didn't care at all. It's a big difference between saying, all right, I did the crime, I did the time, I was completely wrong, and I'm rehabilitated, versus it's like, whatever, it means nothing to me, she means nothing to me. And Charlie says Roman Polanski says he still likes underage girls. I doubt he can barely walk now. Yee. Fire Pixie says she was 13. Yes, yes. And, I mean, I don't even want to go into all of the specifics about that story because it's a little just disturbing. Well, Charlie says, yet I love his movies and makes me feel horrible. He was a good filmmaker. And I openly told you guys that Roman Polanski directed a film called The Ghostwriter, which actually inspired a lot of the info that is in my second book, Down the Dark Lane, which you can hear on YouTube for free. The feature story in that one was inspired by Roman Polanski and The Ghostwriter. But that's kind of what we're talking about. Like, you can recognize that somebody was talented, but they were also a criminal. But, I openly said in a previous episode of Black Box Online Radio that there is an individual out there named Danny Masterson who was on That 70s Show, and, he's an actor, and I refuse to watch any of his stuff now because Danny Masterson was a terrible rapist. He's in jail, spending at least 30 years in prison. He's a rapist. And he's also someone who doesn't seem to show a lot of shame or remorse. And he was going to his sentencing, just posting on Instagram, kind of like holding up his coffee at Starbucks, acting like nothing's wrong. And that really bothered me. And the worst part is, Danny Masterson was somebody that I had always looked up to as an entertainer because he was an actor on That 70s Show. Then he goes on to do movies, and he was an entrepreneur. He opened 12 bars and nightclubs and restaurants, and he was a DJ at some of the nightclubs. But he's a rapist. And then we have another one here from Charlie who says, I try to say his experience during the Holocaust messed him up forever. Well, there were a lot of people who went through the Holocaust that survived that didn't get messed up. And I was actually just watching an episode of 48 Hours where the grandson of a Holocaust survivor was murdered. This was the murder of Blaise Bernstein, who was killed by a neo-Nazi in the United States of America. And she's just like, I survived the Holocaust, and my grandson in America got murdered by a neo-Nazi from the Atomwaffen cell. And that's when that story is coming back into the news because it's been a very long, drawn-out process with the trial. And I did a very small segment about it on Black Box Online Radio back in 2019. And I didn't even remember all of the specifics. I watched the episode again today, and, she's telling the story about, her personal experiences. She didn't go on to kill anyone, and she didn't go on to be a rapist. Granted, not everybody who's going to go through the Holocaust is going to have the same experiences, but what I'm trying to go at is, it's kind of like our discussions with serial killers. There's perhaps something genetic. There's perhaps something that is in the brain, like neurological functioning, dark spots in the brain, and so on. Maybe they've had head injuries as children. Maybe they've had a lot of physical abuse, and people are abused at different levels. I think all of that could very well take place. But because I talk a lot about psychopathy, and because I look into a lot of stories involving psychopathic and sociopathic individuals, one thing that I gathered about them, and I don't even remember the exact source, me, the scholar, right? No, I'm not a scholar. But they said that psychopaths and sociopaths have an extreme attention to detail. They are extremely good at paying attention to micro details. And Kim Cattrall, the actress, worked with Roman Polanski, and that's exactly what she said about him. It was like 10 o'clock at night. He's an old man in his 70s, and he's looking at the movie set, and he's like, no, that's not how that character would have their closet. And he's starting to rearrange the items in the closet. And she's like, this closet is not even going to be in the shot. It's off camera, but he wants to set the apartment exactly the way it is. Number one, yes, maybe he's a sociopath. Number two, maybe that actually helped the way that he makes movies. And we have one from Haynes Anthony who says the author is a product of the text. How exactly do you mean, Haynes Anthony? Charlie says, very true, Ned. Childhood trauma can't be excused for being a pedo. Oh, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because, okay, look at this, Charlie. I was watching this in one of the documentaries on psychopathy when some people are like, the psychiatrists, the psychologists who are presenting this stuff, they're saying some people have been abused as children, and they go on to be humanitarians. They go on to start helping other people who have been abused. They go on to start working with individuals and trying to help them overcome their abusive past the way that they learned to overcome their abusive past. It is absolutely not an excuse. And it's not a justification either. But it's also something where we should not be surprised, because there does appear to be this type of split. Some people are abused. They become more destructive. Other people are abused, and they're thinking, I'm going to start my own charity group to help survivors. There is this big split. My life sucked growing up. I've never killed anyone, and I've never done any of this SA stuff. And we have one from Charlie says, oh no, Stanley Kubrick was like that. I don't really know about any allegations against Stanley Kubrick. I take it back. Stanley Kubrick faked the moon landing, right? You know, we do this Q&A session, right? This is one where I wanted to respond to your comments, and I was going to go down the list, and eventually I was going to get to this one here. On Zodiac Monday, I was talking about the moon landing very briefly, because on December 20th of 1968, we have the Lake Herman Road murders, right? And I said that there was this graphic novel out there by Soleil Productions called Serial Killer Series Number 1, which is about the Zodiac Killer. And it features the first two victims of the Zodiac Killer leaning back in David Faraday's car. And David Faraday is talking about the moon landing. And someone said, Ned, what are you talking about? The moon landing happened in 1969. They were murdered in 1968. To add a little bit of clarity, what it actually says is that David Faraday, is just a dramatization, right? He's talking about how, hey, Betty Lou, look at the moon. One day men will walk on it. One day people will walk on it, foreshadowing, anticipating. So they didn't misstate anything or get anything historically accurate. It's just kind of, he's just depicting a 17-year-old boy trying to be romantic when he's on his first official date with Betty Lou Jensen. But the reason why I'm telling you this is somebody else wrote into the comments section and said, Ned, we didn't go to the moon. There was no moon landing. I've not done a single episode about that here on Black Box Online Radio, like an individual standalone episode about the moon landing. However, that is one where I think I don't really support any of the conspiracy theories. Because, hypothetically, if Stanley Kubrick did direct the scenes for the moon landing, and he did film them in some studio outside of Las Vegas, how does that mean we didn't go to the moon? They could have still landed on the moon, and then they just played the footage that Stanley Kubrick had created. But do you ever get this? This is one thing that I say that the moon landing conspiracy theorists nailed. And I know this is done in jest, but it's like, you ever been on the phone with somebody? Hey, hello. No, I can't hear you. What? Yeah, you got Neil Armstrong on the moon. He's on the moon. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. You can hear him better than you can your own cell phone sometimes. I don't support any of those moon landing conspiracy theories, but I also just kind of think that that's a grave injustice of technology. And Until Tomorrow 9 says, people are built differently. Some can rise above and some are destroyed from experiences. Yep, excellent. Not even going to dispute that with you, Until Tomorrow 9. And I think that maybe the mystery is more about just trying to get people to analyze and understand what the differences are. Like, why are some people built differently? Are there actually genetic components, nature versus nurture, program to kill hypothesis, and so on? And Haynes Anthony says, how could Nixon telephone the moon? Well, even if he didn't, I mean, they could be recorded. But this one Russian guy told me once that the Soviets recorded the transmission, and the transmission came from the moon because the Soviets were in a space race with the United States of America, right? And they are monitoring what the U.S. is doing, and they would have been able to pay attention to this because of their own communications. So, I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I'm an astronaut or anything. Ray Grant is here. Hey, Ray, how's it going? Ray says Apollo 8 was the first instance of astronauts being able to photograph the entire Earth. Oh, thanks for that, Ray. And yes, Apollo 8 is the one that the Zodiac Killer liked to use on his stamps, right? The Zodiac liked Apollo 8 stamps, right? Oh, Until Tomorrow 9 says, I'm very curious about the moon landing controversy. Well, you know, I am too. I like to know how these conspiracy theories work. I have this new hobby right now. It's called watching garbage on the internet. It's not a new hobby. I'm joking with you. I've been doing that for, well, as long as there was an internet, as long as we could watch videos. Last night, right before bed, this is the best time to watch garbage on the internet. I'm watching this video about how they're just talking about different types of conspiracy theories. This one's good, though. Why are drugs illegal? Hey, all of my American brothers and sisters out there, why are drugs illegal? Well, you might say, it's because the government can't get their cut of the tax dollars. They can't tax it, so they don't want it to be legal. Some might say, well, some drugs are too dangerous, like cocaine and meth and heroin. I almost said Heth and Merowin. Heth and Merowin. They sound like a pretty cool band. Meth and heroin. What this video is saying is that at any time in America, there is between $250 and $500 billion of drug money moving around. That's almost $500 billion. And how would that be beneficial to people in power? Governments, intelligence agencies, and the global elites can use these underground, unmonitored, unrestricted chains to move money about in unseen ways. They would benefit amazingly from having their hands in the drug markets, and also secret supply routes, secret transportation zones. You ever heard about that secret Trans-Siberian Railway that goes from North Korea to Moscow? Not the famous one, the secret one. It's not available to the public. So I think that those are just some fascinating things to talk about. Fire Pixie says, do you have to dial 9 first to get the line to the moon? No, Fire Pixie. You have to press the star button. Sorry, couldn't resist. Oh, Haynes Anthony says, Earth is wrong in size and photos. Haynes Anthony, are you a genuine believer in the moon landing conspiracy? Well, you know, I'd love to hear some things about this, and much as Ray Grant said, we have all these photos of the Earth. And one thing, though, that I think is really interesting, and this is from Dr. Michio Kaku, who says when they took photos of the moon, the shadows happen in a way that is very consistent with some things that hoaxers might not have been familiar with. The shadows in the photos have sunshine because the moon has no atmosphere. So the sun is shining on the moon, and that makes a shadow. But the sun reflects off the Earth, and that also creates a second shadow. It's something that's called earthshine. Like here on Earth, we would experience sunshine and moonshine. On the moon, they would experience sunshine and earthshine. And the photos account for that. And this is not talking about the photos of the Earth that you're saying. I haven't measured them myself, but I like, I can't comment on that, but I just think that's a really interesting thing that hoaxers probably wouldn't have thought of. Number two, I once watched one of these documentaries that is showing how is NASA lying to us, right? Well, they demonstrated how you could fake that photo of the Earth. Like, what's Grant talking about, the famous photo of the Earth, the from space? How could you fake that? They did the whole thing in the documentary, right? Using a painting and a light box, and like the light at a certain angle on this oil painting. Yeah, it looks just like the photograph. And I'm just sitting back and I'm watching that. And I'm just thinking, what is your point? Your painting of the moon looks like a photo on the moon of the moon? No, your painting of the Earth looks like the photo of the Earth. That's the whole point. It's like, no matter what, that doesn't prove that the photo is false. Like, if you were to take a photo of me right now, Fire Pixie's listening to this on her phone. She does like a screenshot of this, and then you go to an excellent artist who has ultra realistic capabilities, and you say, "Hey, can you do a painting that's going to look very realistic of Ned DeHaan?" And they do. Then you'd be like, "Well, he's not real. Any artist could do that." The painting looks like the photograph because you did it on purpose. I don't know. Oh, 42 Lehman is here. Hey, how's it going? Have you or will you ever do a deep dive on Ed Gein? I read his over 200-page confession transcript. Definitely worth a read if you're interested or you like psychopaths. I absolutely should, 42 Lehman. I'm somebody who talks a lot about serial killers here on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. But Ed Gein is one story that I've neglected. I have like 6 episodes on John Wayne Gacy. This is the Chinese 6, right, by the way. And I've done multiple episodes on Jeffrey Dahmer, multiple episodes on Ted Bundy, but not Ed Gein, one of the most famous stories. And I'm not exactly sure why. But yeah, I would love to do something like that. I would love to do a deep dive into the story of Ed Gein. I'm not even prepared to talk about it now. I just think that it's so fascinating how Ed Gein went on to inspire multiple serial killer movies, such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Hannibal Lecter is based on Ed Gein. I know those were books first by Thomas Harris, but Psycho is also inspired by Ed Gein. Fire Pixie says, "Ew, I'll have to find the confession of Ed Gein." That was my reaction. Oh, that's not Fire Pixie. That's Charlie. Your avatars look nothing alike. What am I thinking? Charlie says, "Ew, I'll have to find the confession of Ed Gein." Yes, that's my reaction. It's going to be gross. That's going to be disgusting. When I'm watching those short videos on YouTube and they talk about, you guys know about Ed Gein, right? He liked to cut off the skin and try and create this type of skin bodysuit. Very, very twisted and demented individual. It's going to be disgusting. But you can't walk away from something in the true crime world just because it's a little bit uncomfortable. That's the whole point. If you're going to study the dark side of humanity, learn about everything. Ray Grant says, the combination of Lake Herman Road murders being staged in proximity to the Apollo 8 blastoff and that picture being on the Halloween card envelope suggests that they were preoccupied with the image of the Earth. Well, Ray Grant is, of course, a supporter of the theory that the Zodiac murders were a conceptual art project, and that is going to tie in nicely together in Ray Grant's theory. Fire Pixie says, I have a soft spot in my heart for Ed Gein. I'm from Wisconsin as well, and I kind of get him. Not the whole him, but I get his loneliness. Like we were talking about stories of abuse from childhood, and even if it's something that I haven't experienced, some of these serial killers have been through horrible cases of abuse. Henry Lee Lucas, for example. And yeah, I do connect with them. And even though they went on to do horrible things, I have those moments when I'm just like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Charles Manson even. And some of the mass shooters as well. All right, though. I was talking to you about the murder of Blaze Bernstein for a little bit. And I just watched that episode of 48 Hours. And he was murdered by an individual who was part of the Atomwaffen terror cell, neo-Nazi cell. And it appeared that they're saying he was targeted because he was gay. Yet, the guy who murdered him met up with him because they matched on Tinder, almost like he's a closeted homosexual trying to pass himself off as a neo-Nazi who hates gays, but he is one. And I'm just sitting back. I'm watching this thing, and I'm like, come on, get on with it. Get on with it. Where's the big revelation? Oh, another case of sexual frustration. But not all cases are like that. I saw another episode of 48 Hours recently about the murder of Allie Costello, and she was a student at Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi, and she was murdered by an individual named Brandon Thiesfield, who was her romantic partner. Although it appeared that they weren't in a real relationship, it was a casual relationship, one that Allie Costello wanted to escalate into something like official boyfriend and girlfriend. And he wrote this scathing confession letter after he murdered her. He shot her at least 9 times with a .40 caliber handgun. And he's all just like, I know I'm going to get caught. I'm either going to die or go to jail. An enormous case of societal suicide. But in that instance, where's the sexual frustration? He had the girl. She wanted a relationship with him, and he's the one who didn't want it. I think that would be an example of someone who was just very frustrated with their life and they wanted a way out. Now, you're going to talk about some things. Yeah, I've definitely had some of those feelings, but I certainly didn't murder the person who was trying to be close to me. The one person who's trying to be your intimate partner. And yeah, there's some more things to the story, like he thought that she was pregnant, and that scared him a little bit, but still, that just seemed like someone who was emotionally damaged and didn't know how to deal with it. Now, Charlie says, Ed Gein is the reason why I'm into true crime. My mom traumatized me about the lampshades made of skin when I was 7. Oh, as I said, it's going to be gross. Lampshades made of skin. Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, right? It rubs its lotion on the skin, or it gets the hose again. And Charlie also says, Ed Gein was so isolated, I can't imagine the loneliness. I can. Been there. Yeah, done some of that. You get used to it in West Virginia. 42 Lehman says yes, but he wasn't 100% bothered talking about his grave robbing and what he did with dead bodies, detailed about how to pull off a face. See, that's the thing, though, with these psychopathic serial killers. They enjoy a lot of it. Oh, this goes back to the guy. What's his name? Dr. Matt Logan, whom I was talking about last time when he said, psychopaths and sociopaths have lots of emotions for themselves. They enjoy things for themselves. No regard for other people. That's why they're so dangerous. 42 Lehman says, I'm from a very small town, and I 100% know little odd old men like Ed Gein. I also feel sorry for him. He was probably a little bit mentally stunted. That's something else that we see from other serial killers. They are mentally stunted. And what's the name of the guy? Was it the Brickhead Killer? Another clear case of that extremely low IQ, like IQ of 70 or something like that. And he still goes on to be a serial killer. And Until Tomorrow 9 says, where in the world did you hear Ed Gein talking about his activities? Well, I think 42 Lehman said that it was in his 200-page confession, right? Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says, Ned, I don't remember if you already talked about the JFK assassination. Jerome, in 2023, I did one episode about JFK. It's very short, like 25 minutes. And back in 2020, when I did the show daily, every day for 20 minutes, I did some episodes. Specifically, some people asked me to look at the role of the Mossad in the JFK assassination, and that is perhaps not the best way to jump in. First, start with the conspiracy theory right before I even had digested the facts. But I, did a little bit of Googling, and I found the episodes that had been made by Michael Collins Piper, and his theory that pro-Israeli elements of the Mossad and pro-Israeli elements of the CIA conspired to take out JFK. So I explored it from that angle, and that's the only real deep dive that I've done into the Kennedy assassination. Not the most practical, but... Oh, Ray Grant says, the Cooper Vortex podcast is pretty impressive. Ray, I saw your most recent episode. are you going to be on the Cooper Vortex? I know you were talking about it, and it's really impressive because Darren Schaefer has had so many great guests on there from different angles. Like, as he was telling me, he had the biographer of John Emile List on there, who was even just wanted to clear up some of the myths about John Emile List as a D.B. Cooper suspect, because John Emile List was a family annihilator. He was a real murderer, but maybe not D.B. Cooper. Darren even interviewed a titaniumologist. Maybe you guys would call him a metallurgist. I like the word titaniumologist. I invented it. Don't hate me. And 42 Lehman says, Ed Gein files by John Borowski. It's just copies of official documents. Well, it's really interesting how many of those are out there, 42 Lehman. On Zodiac Monday this year, multiple times, I was talking to you guys about the Allen files by John Bowman, which is the same thing. It's just the copies of the documents about Arthur Lee Allen, mostly arranged in order. Fascinating stuff, but you have to sift through them. You don't have to. I had to sift through them to find the parts that I was looking for. It's almost like you just have the box of sand and you got to find the one little gold nugget that's at the bottom or something and just kind of make your way through it. And I think that that's very valuable because they are primary sources. It's not exactly light reading. It's not exactly fun reading. It's not exactly a page turner. It's very dense and tedious to go through things like police reports and military records, but they have been arranged. And Ray says he would love to be on Darren's podcast. Sure, Ray. And I guess you're going to get the spoiler, Ray. Your suspect is Richard McCoy and D.B. Cooper. My McCoy episode is going to come out tomorrow here on Black Box Online Radio. Usually I like to leave the subjects as a type of surprise, but you guys will hear that now only because Ray did a video talking about McCoy. And you guys can please go over to Ray Grant's channel. He has lots of videos on the Zodiac and now some on D.B. Cooper. And he will be doing a JFK assassination series after I'm done with the Crackpot Files. Oh, yes, Ray's videos right now are focusing on the Crackpot Files that are put out by Michael Butterfield. And those are available on his website, ZodiacKillerFacts.com. Until Tomorrow says, I'm D.B. Cooper, aren't you? Well, I'll be damned. Until tomorrow 9. You're D.B. Cooper the whole time? Cancel Cooper Friday. The case is solved. All right, what am I going to do instead of Cooper Friday? I don't know. Maybe I'll just go to the beach or something. I can bring the fox with me. Being weird is not a crime. Don't judge. And 42 Lehman says, 100%. I did that with the Gein files. Sift through things to find the nuggets. It's a rambling mess. Well, so much of those things. Like when I read the Allen files, 42 Lehman, it's the technical jargon. It's stuff that's not even related to the true crime aspects of the story. And they didn't mean to do that when they're making reports on other subjects. But that stuff's just there. And you would just there are certain elements that we as true crime followers want to learn. But we reach a certain point where you can't just accept these external commentary sources and be like, all right, well, these are lots of opinions. Let's try to see if we can get, the factual narrative down. Oh, Ray Grant says, Drew Beeson convinced me that Ted Braden is D.B. Cooper. Ted Braden is a very strong suspect, and that's a question that I like to ask a lot of people now because I got it from Drew Beeson. If you had the chance to recreate the Cooper skyjacking, which widely discussed suspect would you choose? Would you choose McCoy? Not exactly. He's way too nervous. Would you choose somebody like Milton Vordal? No, he's 58 years old and no evidence of him jumping. Would you choose Ted Braden? Yes, because he could do it in his sleep. Ray Grant says, I gave you a shout out on episode 6. Oh, yes, Ray, I watch all of your videos. And thank you for all the numerous shout outs that you've given me. But everybody, this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning is going to be winding down. You can put anything else you want in the chat, and I will try to respond. Other than that, you guys know where to find me. BlackboxNed88 on Instagram, BlackboxNed88 on TikTok, and BlackboxOnlineRadio at AOL.com for sending some larger stuff. But wait. Melissa just got here. Hey, Melissa, how's it going? Welcome to True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning. Cheers from the Fox. Melissa says, we haven't even jumped the gun to say that Loringdale Hill was D.B. Cooper, and the conclusion could be drawn that he was an airman, but no jumping to conclusion. Sorry I laughed before I read it off for the audience, but that was funny. Everybody can see that in the live chat when they listen back. And there was another one from Haynes Anthony who said, in discussing Hitchcock, Robin Wood said that the homicidal maniac is the new romantic hero. Norman Bates, though? I guess. Mm-mm. No, I disagree. I disagree, Haynes Anthony. The hero or heroine of the movie Hitchcock was Marley Renfro, the girl in Alfred Hitchcock's shower, the body double only for the naked scenes. Because Myra Davis, the other stand-in, would not do that. She would only do the body double work for the clothes scenes. So Marley Renfro did it for the nude scenes. They needed to get a Playboy playmate, and she may have impressed a certain individual named Robert Graysmith in his youth. Graysmith always talks about having a lifelong obsession with her. I know exactly what he's talking about, but I don't want to say it because I don't want to embarrass another man like that, even though Graysmith doesn't listen to my show. Do ya, Bobby? Anyway, I'm joking, by the way, Hans Anthony. You got it. Oh, and Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says, and BBOR is on Spotify. Yes, it is. Black Box True Crime Black Box Podcast. Thank you for the promotion, Jerome. Until Tomorrow 9 says, Haynes, that's because Tony Perkins was an attractive man. Read the original novel. The Perkins killer character is written as a scruffy fat guy. No judgment. Not on my part. And everybody, yes, you have a wonderful day. Winding down now here, but you guys can also just find me in the usual places. And the White Horse Killer Saga will be coming out this weekend on Black Box Online Radio. And I will see you on Monday for a new episode about the Zodiac Killer. Until next time.